20 years without a woman, the cowboy thought he'd die alone. Until one morning, she came to his door.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Cole Merrick woke before sunrise, the same way he had for years, rising from the narrow bed with a slow exhale as the cold in the cabin pressed against his bare feet. He pulled on his shirt and stepped toward the stove, crouching to stir the embers until a thin flame caught. The light grew gradually, revealing the plain interior he had kept in strict order. Tools along one wall, spare blankets folded on a shelf, a wooden table marked by years of use. This routine steadied him every morning. It reminded him that he still had control over the parts of life he could manage. He had lived alone on this Wyoming homestead for nearly 2 decades. At 39, he carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen enough disappointment to avoid unnecessary risks. His parents had moved east. His brothers built lives far from the plains. The woman he once cared for left after deciding the frontier held nothing she wanted. Cole chose solitude because it demanded nothing. His goal was simple: keep the ranch standing, keep the animals alive, and endure whatever the land forced on him. He kept to himself and expected nothing from anyone. He slipped into his coat and boots, preparing to step outside and check the barn, when a soft impact sounded against the door. It was faint and uneven, the kind of knock someone makes when they're unsure if they have a right to ask for help. Cole froze mid-step, his breath held in tight control while he listened again. The second knock confirmed it. No one ever arrived without warning. Travelers avoided this stretch of land. Neighbors lived too far away to drop by unannounced. Cole reached for the latch slowly, scanning the room once to make sure he had something within reach if trouble walked in. He pulled the door open a few inches and felt the cold rush of outside air hit his face. A woman stood on the porch, leaning slightly into the frame as if her legs might give out. Her dress was torn in several places, the edges stiff from dried mud. A thin shawl clung around her shoulders, barely covering the bruising on her arms. The raw, wind-burned skin along her cheeks told him she had traveled far in harsh weather. Her gaze lifted just enough to meet his, not defiantly, but out of sheer will not to collapse in front of a stranger. "My name is Mara," she said, voice hoarse and strained. "I need a place to warm up. I don't want trouble. I just need a moment inside." Cole studied her quickly, gathering details he needed to judge the situation. She was young, mid-20s at most, but her eyes held the guarded look of someone who had endured more than her age should allow. Her boots were nearly falling apart. The fraying soles showed signs of long days on foot. Her shoulders trembled from the cold and from exhaustion she was trying to hide. She did not look dangerous. She looked desperate. Cole stepped back without a word, opening the door wide enough for her to enter. She hesitated, clearly waiting for him to change his mind, then crossed the threshold with careful steps. The warmth from the stove reached her slowly, loosening the tension in her breath. She kept to the far side of the room, not wanting to invade more space than necessary. He closed the door behind her. She didn't flinch, which told him she had been expecting sharper noises than that. "Sit," he said quietly. Mara lowered herself into a chair, her hands gripping the edges while she steadied her breathing. Up close, he saw faint marks along her wrists, rough skin rubbed raw by something she didn't explain. She didn't offer details, and he didn't press. Cole poured hot water into a tin cup and set on the table in front of her. She stared at it for several seconds before lifting it with unsteady fingers. The heat made her eyes close briefly in relief, and a controlled sigh left her chest. "I didn't plan to reach anyone's home," she said after a moment. "I kept walking because I didn't know where else to go." Cole leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed loosely. He didn't interrupt. She took another slow sip before continuing. "I left a man behind," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know how close he might be. I've been moving day and night. I'm not asking for much, just a place to breathe." Her admission hit him hard with a mix of caution and sympathy. He had seen enough over the years to understand what kind of situations made a woman flee alone. She didn't need to describe the details. Her posture told the truth on its own. The rigid shoulders, the way she checked the windows without turning her head, the exhaustion that settled deeper than physical strain. Cole weighed the risks silently. If someone dangerous was searching for her, they might come this far. But letting her walk back into the cold without shelter was something he couldn't reconcile with any sense of decency he still had left. "You're safe here for now," he said, keeping his tone steady. Mara nodded once, though the tension in her jaw said she wasn't fully convinced safety was possible anywhere. He stepped back to give her space. She watched him with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty, unsure of his intentions, but relieved not to be forced back outside. Cole returned to the stove, added more pine to the fire, and noticed how she shifted closer to the heat while trying not to seem intrusive. Every small movement she made revealed another piece of her reality. How long she had been running, how little trust she carried, how deeply she needed a place to stop. Outside, the wind moved across the yard with a low rustle. Inside, the cabin felt different than it ever had before. For 20 years, it had been nothing but walls, tools, and silence. Now someone else's breathing filled the space. Cole wasn't sure what this would mean for his routine or for the life he had forced himself to accept. But as he watched Mara's fingers tremble around the tin cup, he understood one thing clearly. Turning her away had never been an option. She wasn't safe alone, and he wasn't the kind of man who ignored that. The sun rose slowly behind the ridge, sending pale light through the window and landing across the floor in a thin line. Mara's shoulders lowered slightly as warmth spread through her. Cole stood nearby, silent, steady, trying to make sense of a day that had begun unlike any other he'd lived. For the first time in years, his solitude had shifted, and the change felt irreversible. Mara woke to the sound of boots moving across the wooden floor, slow and measured, each step deliberate. She opened her eyes carefully, realizing she had fallen asleep in the chair near the stove. The quilt draped over her shoulders wasn't hers. She lifted the edge of it and paused, understanding Cole must have placed it there while she slept. The realization tightened her throat with unfamiliar emotion, something between relief and unease. Cole stood by the window, securing the latch against the morning wind. His expression carried the same reserved focus he had worn the night before. He approached life with a steady hand, always calculating the next task. He noticed her waking, but didn't comment on it. He simply nodded once as a greeting, offering space while still acknowledging her presence. "You can use the bed if you need longer sleep," he said quietly. "You were half frozen." Mara adjusted the quilt around her shoulders. "I didn't mean to take your chair." "It's fine," he replied, turning toward the stove to prepare the morning fire. His movements were controlled, never wasteful, as if he measured each gesture to conserve energy. She watched him work, noting how he checked the wood pile with practiced efficiency. She shifted her feet to the floor, testing how much strength had returned. The ache in her legs reminded her how far she had walked before finding his door. Memories of the man she fled, the long nights hiding behind rocks or brush, and the cold mornings spent forcing herself to continue rose unbidden. She pushed them down, steadying her breathing. Cole poured water into a small pot and set on the stove. The faint hiss of heating metal filled the room. He glanced her way briefly. "You eat first, then we see what you need." The simplicity of the offer struck her deeply. She wasn't used to being considered in any routine, let alone given priority. She straightened her posture, trying not to reveal how much the kindness unsettled her. "I can work," she said, needing him to know she wasn't there to take advantage. "I can clean or cook. I can help with chores." Cole didn't dismiss her, nor did he rush to accept. He studied her carefully, as if assessing what she could realistically manage in her condition. "We'll see what tasks make sense. No need to push yourself today." Mara lowered her gaze for a moment, absorbing the calm in his tone. She expected suspicion or interrogation. Instead, he approached her presence like a responsibility he accepted without complaint. A faint creak came from the roof as the wind shifted. Cole stepped outside to check the barn. Mara followed him to the door, stopping short of the threshold. From there, she watched him walk across the yard. His gait was strong, steady, intentional, the walk of someone who had survived harsh winters, long cattle drives, and years without another person to lean on. While he inspected the barn, she observed the land surrounding the homestead. The open plain stretched far in all directions, unbroken except for sparse brush and the faint line of distant hills. The isolation startled her. If she left now, there would be no shelter for miles. She tightened the quilt around herself, absorbing the reality of her situation. This cabin was the only safe place she had left. Cole returned a few minutes later, brushing dust from his gloves. "Horses are fine," he said as he stepped inside. "One of them's restless. Needs walking later." Mara nodded, unsure if he expected help or was simply speaking to keep her informed. She wasn't used to being included in decisions about daily life. The small consideration made her stomach twist with something unfamiliar. Cole reached for a wooden bowl and filled it with warm food. He set it on the table without ceremony, then stepped back to give her room. She approached slowly, hands trembling from fatigue, and took the first small bite. The taste was simple but nourishing. Her body responded eagerly, reminding her how long she had eaten only scraps. As she ate, Cole leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely. He wasn't watching her, but he remained nearby, as if ensuring she didn't collapse. His quiet presence kept the room balanced, neither tense nor overly familiar. "Do you expect anyone to come after you?" he asked finally, his voice even, not confrontational. Mara swallowed carefully. The question had been inevitable, yet he delivered it without pressure, allowing her the choice to answer or stay silent. "I don't know how close he might be," she said. "I left without warning. He won't let it go easily." Cole's posture shifted slightly. Not anger, just a readiness to adjust his plans. "You're under my roof now," he replied. "If trouble comes, you won't face it alone." The assurance struck her with such force, she had to sit straighter to maintain composure. No one had stood between her and danger in years. She didn't know how to carry the weight of someone else's protection. A moment of quiet filled the cabin, broken only by the stove's low crackle. Mara finished her meal and set the bowl aside with careful hands. Cole noticed the way she tried to remain composed despite the exhaustion pressing into her features. "I'll show you the pump outside," he said. "Water's cold, but clean." She followed him into the yard, taking small, measured steps. The air bit at her skin, but the movement helped her loosen the stiffness in her limbs. Cole demonstrated how to work the pump handle, then stepped back so she could try. She gripped the metal with determination, forcing water to rise in uneven bursts. He watched without stepping in, allowing her the dignity of doing it herself. After a few attempts, her arms trembled and she released the handle. Cole filled a bucket for her without comment, acknowledging the effort she had already given. They returned to the cabin together, their steps falling into a natural rhythm. The first sign they might eventually move through this place side by side, rather than as strangers forced together by circumstance. Inside, Mara hung the quilt over a chair, now more aware of the room than when she had first stumbled in. The space felt slightly less foreign, though she remained alert, not yet convinced safety could last longer than a day. Cole removed his coat and set on its hook. "You rest more if you need it. There's work later, but not now." Mara hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't ready to trust, but she was no longer trembling. The cabin settled into a new silence, one shaped not by loneliness, but by two people learning how to breathe in the same space without fear. It was the first day they spent together, and already the ground beneath their lives had started to shift. Mara woke again later in the morning, this time on the small bed Cole insisted she use. The quilt covered her legs, and the faint warmth left in the sheets told her she had slept longer than she intended. She pushed herself upright slowly, feeling the stiffness in her arms and the bruises along her ribs. Every injury reminded her how recently she had been running for her life. She blinked until the room came into focus. The wooden walls, the single lantern on the shelf, the neatly stacked firewood in the corner. Nothing in the cabin looked threatening, yet her body stayed tense from habit. She heard movement outside, steady, and controlled. Cole was working somewhere near the barn. The muffled thud of metal against wood came in intervals, suggesting he was fixing something. Mara slid off the bed, straightened the quilt, and folded it at the foot with quiet care. She didn't want to appear careless or ungrateful, not after being allowed to stay without question. She stepped outside, keeping her shawl tight around her shoulders. The wind stretched across the plains in long, cold gusts, flattening the grass and carrying the smell of damp soil from the thawing ground. She spotted Cole kneeling beside a broken fence rail, hammer in hand. He didn't notice her immediately. His focus stayed locked on the task. One nail driven in at a time, each strike even and deliberate, as if precision steadied him. Mara approached slowly, unsure if interrupting him would be welcome. When he finally glanced up, he paused to take in the fact that she was standing outside instead of resting. "You're up," he said, dusting with shavings from his hands. His tone held no judgment, only quiet observation. "I didn't want to sleep the whole day," she replied. "I need to keep moving, or my head fills with things I'd rather not think about." Cole stood, leaning slightly on the repaired rail to test its strength. "Walking helps with that," he said. "So does work." Mara watched the fence settle back into place. Cole's homestead wasn't large, but every part of it showed how much effort he put into keeping it intact. The barn was patched in multiple places, the water trough reinforced with new planks, the porch supports replaced with fresh beams. Nothing about his life came easy, yet nothing was neglected. "You built all this alone?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. He picked up the remaining nails and stored them in his coat pocket. "Had a partner years back. He left for Montana. Haven't seen him since." The admission was simple, but it revealed something deeper. Cole didn't keep people long. Not because he drove them away, but because life in these lands scattered folks like dust. They walked back toward the cabin together, their footsteps crunching against the cold soil. Mara studied the horizon, her eyes moving constantly, scanning for shapes that didn't belong. Cole noticed. "You expecting someone?" he asked. "I'm expecting him," Mara answered, her voice tense. "The man I left. He doesn't let go easily." Cole didn't answer right away. He opened the cabin door for her, waited until she stepped inside, then followed with a slow exhale. "If he comes here," he said, "I'll handle him." She turned sharply, startled by the certainty in his tone. "Why would you take on something that isn't yours?" He removed his gloves, dropping them onto the table. "Because you walked to my door half frozen. Because you deserve a place to stand without being hunted. That's reason enough." The response lodged in her chest like a weight she wasn't sure how to carry. Gratitude wasn't something she offered easily, not after years of having kindness twisted into debt, but Cole's words didn't demand anything from her. They simply acknowledged her right to safety. Mara sat at the table, feeling the tension in her shoulders shift slightly. Cole filled 2 cups with warm water and placed one in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, absorbing the heat. "How long were you on the trail?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said quietly. "I kept moving at night. I slept wherever I could hide. I didn't think I'd make it past the ridge." "What made you leave?" She hesitated. The memories came fast, shouting, slammed doors, hands gripping her arms too hard, nights forced to endure whatever her husband demanded. She steadied her breath, controlling the rise in her chest. "He treated me like something he owned," she said. "It got worse every year. When he started talking about selling me off to settle a debt, I ran." Cole's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pry for details. His silence told her he understood more than she expected. "You did the right thing leaving," he finally said. "No one belongs to anyone." The certainty in his voice made her throat burn. She lowered her eyes so he wouldn't see the emotion building too quickly to hide. After a moment, Cole stepped away from the table and reached for a small wooden crate. He set it near her feet. Inside were worn tools, pliers, twine, a small hammer, items clearly used for small repairs. "If you want something to keep your mind steady," he said, "you can help mend the tack later. Only if you feel up to it." Mara looked into the crate. The tools were familiar enough that she didn't feel intimidated. "I can do that," she said. "Good," Cole replied. He stepped toward the door, preparing to check the water trough again. Mara watched him pause before leaving, as if debating whether to say something else. "You're safe for now," he said quietly. "I don't break my word." Mara nodded slowly, gripping the cup tighter. Her breathing steadied. Her pulse slowed. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she might actually stay somewhere longer than a night. Cole stepped outside, leaving the door slightly ajar so she could hear his boots in the yard. Mara remained at the table, absorbing everything that had changed in such a short time. She had come to his door nearly dead from exhaustion. Now she had warmth, a bed, and a man who didn't look at her like property. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first sign of a life where trust might eventually exist. Mara spent the morning sorting through the crate Cole had left for her. The tools were worn smooth from years of use, each one carrying marks that showed how much work had been done with them. She picked up a leather strap from the pile he had placed on the table. The edges were cracked, the stitching loose. Fixing small things like this steadied her thoughts in a way she hadn't expected. She began threading the twine carefully, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Outside, she heard the steady rhythm of Cole chopping wood. The sound came in clean intervals, an axe striking with splitting a log falling. His steps moved back and forth across the yard, a pattern she was beginning to recognize. He wasn't rushing. He was maintaining the property the way he lived, disciplined, methodical, controlled. She finished the first strap and set it aside. When Cole returned to the cabin to drop off firewood, he paused at the table to examine her work. He held the strap between his fingers, turning it over once. "Stitching strong," he said. "You've done this before." "My father kept horses," she replied. "I fixed whatever I could to avoid his temper." Cole lowered the strap slowly, absorbing more than just the information she gave. He didn't ask anything else. Instead, he placed another small job in front of her, a cracked buckle that needed replacing. Mara understood the unspoken message. She could contribute, but at a pace that didn't break her down further. He stepped outside again, this time toward the well. Mara watched him through the window. He checked the rope, replaced a frayed knot, and inspected the pulley with the same care he applied to every task. She realized he wasn't just maintaining a ranch. He was holding together a life that had been built alone for far too long. When he came back inside, Mara stood to stretch her legs. The stiffness settled into her lower back, a reminder of how long she had traveled without proper rest. Cole noticed the way she pressed a hand against her side. "You should walk a bit," he said. "Sitting too long will make you achy." She nodded, tying her shawl around her shoulders again. Cole held the door open as she stepped outside. The air was cold but clear, with a faint scent of damp earth from the melting frost. The sky stretched across the plains in a wide gray blue, and the wind carried the distant sound of cattle shifting near the hill. Mara walked toward the barn, taking slow steps to keep from tiring too quickly. She slipped inside and found one of Cole's horses, a calm bay gelding, watching her with steady eyes. She approached the stall door carefully. The horse flicked its ears forward, curious but not anxious. Mara reached out and let him sniff her hand before brushing her fingers along his muzzle. The simple contact eased the tightening in her chest. Cole appeared in the doorway behind her, arms folded loosely. "He's gentle," he said. "Comes from a quiet line." "He seems patient," she replied. "Better than most I've met." Cole stepped closer, but not enough to crowd her. "Animals are easier than people. They don't hide what they feel." Mara let her hand rest on the horse's neck, absorbing the slow rise and fall of its breathing. "I'm not good at hiding things either," she said. "I've just had to pretend I am." Cole didn't comment, but she saw a change in his expression, an understanding that deepened without him saying a word. They worked together for the next hour. Mara brushed the horse, sweeping loose hair into a small pile, while Cole tightened the stall latches and replaced a weakened beam near the door. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them shifted from cautious to steady, the kind that allowed each of them to focus without feeling watched. When Cole finished his repairs, he wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the barn wall. "You're getting your strength back," he observed. "Slowly," she replied, resting the brush on a shelf. "You'll be here until you're ready to move on," he said, without looking at her directly. "I won't push you, and I won't keep you if you want to go." Mara froze for a moment. The idea of leaving had been the only thing that kept her alive for weeks. Leave the danger. Leave the man hunting her. Leave whatever new trouble found her. But standing in Cole's barn, hearing him offer freedom instead of conditions, she felt the ground shift under her again. "I don't know where I'd go," she said honestly. "I don't have a destination." Cole nodded once. "Then you stay until you find one." They walked back toward the cabin side by side. Their steps didn't match perfectly, but they stayed close enough that Mara didn't feel exposed. When they reached the porch, Cole paused and looked across the open plains, scanning the horizon with quiet vigilance. "Someone could come through here in a few days," he said. "A trader I know. If he hears anything unusual in town, he usually tells me. We'll know if trouble is nearby." Mara felt a small pulse of fear tighten in her chest. Cole noticed a shift in her breathing. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice low but firm. "That changes things." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him longer than before, studying the steady lines of his face, the quiet strength in the way he stood, the way he positioned himself slightly between her and the horizon, as if it were instinct. Inside, she returned to the table and began working on the cracked buckle. Cole moved quietly through the cabin, checking supplies, adjusting tools, preparing for evening chores. Their routines blended, not perfectly, but naturally enough that neither had to think about it. As the sun lowered behind the ridge, Cole lit the lantern, filling the room with a warm, steady glow. Mara paused her work and watched him for a moment. Something had shifted again today. Not dramatic, not spoken, but unmistakably real. Cole wasn't treating her as a guest who might leave at any moment. And she wasn't acting like someone who planned to disappear before dawn. For the first time since the day she ran, Mara felt the faint outline of stability forming around her. It wasn't trust yet, but it was becoming something she had never allowed herself to hope for. A place where she didn't have to be afraid every time the wind changed direction. Cole stepped outside before dawn, the cold still heavy enough to sting his face as he crossed the yard toward the ridge above the homestead. He carried a lantern in one hand and his rifle in the other, not because he expected to use it, but because something had bothered him through the night, an uneasiness he couldn't name. The wind had shifted hours earlier, blowing in from the east, and with it came a faint scent of campfire smoke that didn't belong to him. Mara stood at the cabin door, wrapped in her shawl, watching him climb the slope. She hadn't slept well. Every time the cabin creaked or the wind pressed against the walls, she woke with her heart racing. She kept reminding herself that she wasn't hiding behind barns or fallen trees anymore. But fear didn't vanish just because the walls were thicker. Cole reached the ridge and knelt, holding the lantern low to illuminate the ground. The frost glittered under the weak light, and he scanned the dirt for anything disturbed. It didn't take long to find it, hoof prints running parallel to the rise. They were fresh, not yet softened by the wind, and spaced too widely for a rider traveling casually. Someone had been moving fast. He followed the prints a few yards until he reached a patch of disturbed soil, signs of a horse turning sharply, almost skidding. Cole's jaw tightened. Whoever passed through had stopped long enough to look down toward his land. He blew out the lantern, not wanting to draw attention if someone might still be close. Standing in the gray dawn, he listened. No movement, no voices, no creak of saddle leather, just the wind brushing through dry sage. Mara stepped slowly up the ridge behind him, keeping her steps light so she wouldn't startle him. "Something's wrong?" she asked quietly. Cole pointed at the tracks. "Someone rode close last night." Her throat tightened. She crouched beside him, studying the prints. "Do you think it was him?" "Could be anyone," Cole said. But the rider wasn't traveling for pleasure. He came to look at something. He didn't say the rest, but Mara heard it anyway. "He came to look at us." She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cold wasn't the reason her hands shook. Cole turned toward her, noticing the tension building in her jaw. "I need you to listen," he said, keeping his tone steady. "If that man is out here, he might ask questions in town first. He won't come straight to the door without checking what he's walking into." Mara nodded slowly. "He's cautious. He plans." He doesn't rush unless he thinks he's losing control. Cole studied her face, noting the way her eyes avoided the horizon. She wasn't imagining the threat. She recognized the pattern of someone she had spent years trying to predict. He motioned for her to follow him back down the slope. Come inside. There's more we need to discuss. The walk down felt heavier than the walk up. Mara stepped carefully on the frosted earth, trying to keep her breathing steady. She didn't want Cole to see how quickly fear returned when her past edged close again. But she couldn't hide the way her shoulders hunched or the way she kept glancing back at the ridge. Inside the cabin, Cole shut the door firmly and bolted it, not because he expected an immediate attack, but because he wanted Mara to feel the difference between precaution and panic. He poured warm water into 2 cups. Mara sat at the table, her fingers intertwined tightly to keep from fidgeting. Tell me something, Cole said. If he finds this place, will he try first? Mara looked down at her hands. The memory came quickly. Her husband's voice when he was angry, the way he questioned neighbors, the way he smiled while threatening people who helped her. She swallowed before she answered. He'll pretend to be friendly, she said. He'll act worried for me. He'll ask if anyone saw a woman traveling alone. He'll offer money. And if that doesn't work, he won't stay polite long. Cole nodded once, absorbing every detail. Then I'll handle any conversations from here on. Mara lifted her eyes to him, surprised by the confidence in his voice. You're not obligated to fight my battles. This isn't just your problem, he replied. Someone riding this close means someone thinks they have the right to intrude on my land. That alone is enough reason for me to get involved. Her breath caught. She wasn't used to being defended without strings attached. Cole continued, his tone calm but unyielding. You're safe here, but we're not ignoring the signs. If he's coming this way, we prepare. Mara inhaled slowly, her pulse settling from panic to something steadier. She had never been part of a plan that didn't involve running. The idea of facing danger with someone beside her felt unfamiliar but grounding. Cole stood, reached for his coat, and began checking the rifle. He wasn't agitated, just methodical. Mara watched him move with a sense of control that steadied her nerves. He wasn't acting like a man jumping into a fight. He was acting like someone protecting what mattered. Come outside when you're ready, he said. There's something I want to show you. A few minutes later, she joined him near the barn. Cole pointed toward a section of ground where he had driven stakes into the soil. These are markers, he explained. They help me see movement at night. If someone walks through, the horses alert me. Mara studied the setup. You've lived with threats before. Long time back, he said. I learned to keep systems in place even when things seem calm. For the first time, Mara realized Cole's quiet routine wasn't just habit. It was survival, built over years of loss and long stretches of isolation. He understood danger in a way few men did. Not loudly, not violently, but through a disciplined awareness that came from experience. Mara stepped closer, grounding herself in the reassurance of his presence. Cole didn't reach for her or offer comfort with words. He didn't need to. His certainty filled the air between them like something solid. We'll manage whatever comes, he said. Mara looked out toward the ridge again. The tracks were still visible from where they stood. This time, they didn't look like a promise of doom. They looked like a challenge someone had underestimated. She didn't feel safe yet, but she no longer felt alone. Cole spent the early afternoon reinforcing the barn door, driving new nails into the crossbeam while the wind carried dust across the yard. He wasn't rushing, but every motion carried purpose. Mara watched him from the porch, arms crossed beneath her shawl, studying the way he scanned the horizon before each task. He wasn't paranoid. He was experienced. He didn't ignore warning signs or dismiss possibilities just because they weren't convenient. Mara stepped down from the porch, her boots crunching against thin patches of thawing soil. She approached with careful steps, not wanting to interrupt his work. Cole finished hammering and straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The sun sat low in the sky, giving the plains a flat, pale light that made every shadow stretch long across the ground. I can help with the animals, Mara said. I know how to feed and brush them. My father kept a small stable when I was young. Cole considered her offer in silence, then nodded. Take the bay first. He's calm. He won't test you. Mara entered the barn, breathing in the familiar mix of hay, leather, and dust. It reminded her of mornings long before her marriage, when life was measured in chores instead of survival. She found the brushes on a narrow shelf and moved toward the gelding stall. The horse shifted only slightly, recognizing her scent from the previous day. She raised a hand slowly, letting him lean into her touch before beginning the careful strokes along his neck. The rhythmic brushing soothed her nerves. With each pass, her heartbeat steadied. The horse didn't judge her fear or question her presence. He accepted her without hesitation. Outside, Cole finished reinforcing the hinges and stepped into the barn doorway. He watched her quietly for several moments, taking in how her shoulders relaxed as she worked, how the tightness in her jaw had eased since morning. Mara didn't notice him at first. Her focus stayed entirely on the horse, her movements growing smoother with each stroke. You've done this a long time, Cole said softly. Mara jumped slightly, then exhaled. It's one of the few things that ever made sense to me. Cole stepped inside, leaning against a beam. Animals are honest. People aren't. She paused. The brush held midair. Did someone teach you that? She asked. But did you learn it the hard way? A bit of both, he answered. Mara resumed brushing, absorbing the weight behind his words. Cole rarely mentioned anything personal. Every small admission felt like a glimpse into a life he kept carefully contained. After finishing with the bay, Mara helped Cole haul water from the trough. With every task, she felt her body regaining strength. The cold air pricked her skin, but it kept her sharp, focused, aware of her surroundings. As they worked, the quiet between them grew more familiar. Not tense, not uncertain, simply an understanding that neither needed to fill it with conversation. The rustle of hay, the creak of leather, the intermittent snort of a horse created a steady rhythm around them. By late afternoon, the sky shifted into muted hues of gray and blue. Mara carried an armful of hay toward the last stall, while Cole checked the saddle straps hanging overhead. When she lifted the final bundle, one corner slipped from her grip and scattered across the floor. She crouched quickly to gather it, but her legs trembled from exertion she hadn't fully recovered from. Cole stepped forward without hesitation. Leave it, he said. You've pushed hard enough. Mara kept her eyes on the scattered hay. I don't want to be useless. You're not, he said plainly. You're recovering. That's different. The simplicity of the statement hit her unexpectedly. She waited for the sting of judgment or disappointment, but none came. Cole spoke with the same steady tone he used for everything else, direct, restrained, sincere. She rose slowly, holding onto the stall door for balance. Cole watched her carefully, not in pity, but in assessment, as if determining what she could safely take on without overwhelming herself. You'll get stronger, he said. Just give it time. Mara swallowed the tightness in her throat. She wasn't used to encouragement that didn't come with demands attached. They stepped out of the barn together as the wind shifted again, carrying a colder bite. Cole scanned the ridge out of habit, his eyes narrowing at the darkening line of clouds gathering far to the west. Storm? Mara asked. Could be, he replied. Weather changes quick out here. Mara stood beside him, following his gaze. Every part of the land felt open and vulnerable, a place where nothing stayed hidden for long. Yet she felt safer here than she ever had in a crowded town. Cole motioned her toward the cabin. Inside. I don't want you catching a chill. She obeyed, though she paused once she reached the porch to look back at him. He remained outside for a moment, scanning the horizon one more time before joining her. When he stepped inside, he bolted the door and hung his coat on the wall peg. The cabin filled with the smell of stew Mara had started earlier. She stirred the pot while Cole set dishes on the table. Working in the same small space didn't feel crowded anymore. Instead, it felt coordinated, as if their movements had begun to fall into a rhythm neither had planned. When they sat across from each other, Mara ate slowly, her stomach still adjusting to regular meals. Cole remained silent, but not distant. He watched her carefully, checking for signs of strain or discomfort. After finishing her bowl, Mara rested her hands on the table. Do you think the rider will return tonight? Cole set a spoon down. Not likely. Men who track at night use lanterns or torches. I'd see the light long before they reach the ridge. And if he waits until morning, then I'll know he's coming, Cole replied. This land shows footprints clearly. Nothing approaches without leaving signs. Mara felt the tight coil of dread loosen slightly. Cole didn't rely on hope. He relied on preparation. The lantern flickered gently as the wind pressed against the cabin walls. Mara glanced at the door, then at Cole, feeling the unfamiliar certainty that he would not hesitate to stand between her and danger. Thank you, she said quietly, for treating me like someone who matters. Cole looked at her without shifting his expression, yet something softened in his eyes. You're under my roof. That's all the reason I need. They sat in silence a moment longer, the weight of the day settling around them. Outside, the sky darkened further, hiding the tracks on the ridge, hiding whoever might be watching from distance. Inside, Mara and Cole prepared for a night that felt like a turning point. Not because danger had arrived, but because both of them understood it would come eventually, and neither planned to face it alone. The next morning came with a heavy layer of cloud cover that dimmed the land in a way Mara had not yet seen. The plains looked flatter, the colors drained, as if the weather itself was holding its breath. Cole stepped outside the moment the sky turned gray-blue, carrying a coil of rope and a pair of gloves. He walked the perimeter of the property with slow, calculated steps, inspecting every ridge, dip, and path that led toward his homestead. Mara watched from the window, rubbing her arms through her sleeves. She noticed how Cole moved differently today, less routine, more alert. His eyes scanned the ground with precise attention, pausing whenever something interrupted the usual pattern of hoofprints from his horses. She recognized the posture of someone preparing for the worst without wanting to alarm the person he was protecting. Unable to remain inside with her thoughts, Mara stepped outside and approached him near the small rise behind the cabin. Cole didn't turn. He heard her footsteps in the dirt. What is it? She asked softly. Cole crouched and touched a set of shallow prints. Boot marks, he said. Not mine. Not old enough to ignore. Mara knelt beside him, studying the disturbed soil. The prints angled toward the property before turning sharply away, as if the person had approached quietly, observed something, and then retreated. Her stomach tightened. Was he close to the cabin? Close enough to see the roof, Cole answered. Not close enough to know what's inside. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her breathing. Her husband had been tracking her for months. He knew how to wait, how to watch without revealing himself. Finding these prints didn't surprise her, but seeing proof that her past had reached Cole's land filled her with something sharper than fear, guilt. She stood abruptly, pressing a hand against her ribs. He's going to drag you into this, she whispered. Cole rose as well, dusting his gloves together. I'm already in it, he said. That's not your fault. She looked away, tears threatening but not falling. She hated the idea of someone else suffering because of her choices, even if those choices had been her only path to survival. Cole stepped closer, his voice low and even. Listen, if a man thinks he can take what isn't his, he underestimates the land he's walking into. Mara studied his face, absorbing the certainty in his expression. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't pretending to be fearless. He was simply telling the truth as he saw it. They returned to the cabin together. Cole took a lantern from the shelf and lit it, turning the flame down low. Mara watched him prepare without rushing, checking the lock on the door, organizing tools, setting an extra rifle near the window. None of it looked theatrical. It looked like routine adapted to danger. Sit for a minute, he said gently, gesturing to the chair by the table. Mara obeyed, though her body remained tense, ready to run at the slightest sound. Cole sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. I need to know something, he said. When he finds you, how does he approach? Straightforward? Or does he use someone else to get close? Mara twisted her fingers together beneath the table. He lies, she said. He pretends to be concerned. He says I'm sick and needs help. He acts desperate. People believe him because he looks respectable and speaks softly until he gets what he wants. Cole nodded, filing the information away. Good. Then we know what to expect. Mara hesitated. You don't have to protect me. I can leave before he gets here. That might. No, Cole's tone didn't rise, but it carried finality. You leave, he wins. You stay, we manage this together. Mara felt her throat close with emotion she didn't want to reveal. She bit the inside of her cheek and focused on the lantern flame to ground herself. Cole stood and went to the window. Mara watched him study the open plains again, shoulders loose but ready. He had lived far from people for years, yet he adapted quickly to having someone else to defend. That realization made something shift inside her. Not love, not longing, just the first threads of trust forming in a place nothing had grown for years. A loud crack echoed from the ridge. Mara jumped to her feet before her mind registered the source. Cole raised a hand, signaling her to stay still. He stepped outside slowly, rifle slung across his shoulder, movements controlled and silent. Mara remained behind the doorframe, heart pounding. The sound came again, two pieces of wood snapping under sharp weight. Not a gunshot, not an attack, something stepping through brittle brush. Cole reached the ridge and crouched. A moment later, he waved her over. She hurried to him, clutching her shawl. When she reached him, he pointed into the brush at the base of a scrub oak. A deer limped through the undergrowth, its left hind leg caught briefly in a snare trap someone had abandoned. Mara let out the breath she'd held too long. It wasn't him. No, Cole said. But someone placed that trap, and not recently. Mara's concern deepened. Does that mean he's been here longer than we thought? Could be him, Cole said. Could be someone passing through. Either way, somebody's been using this land without permission. The tension in the air thickened. The plains stretched silent and still, but they no longer felt empty. The sense of being watched didn't fade. It grew clearer, sharper. They freed the deer together, Cole steadying the animal while Mara loosened the snare. The deer bolted into the distance as soon as it gained footing, disappearing quickly into the tall brush. Cole wiped his hands on his trousers. We're dealing with someone who isn't afraid to get close. Mara swallowed hard. He likes moving in circles. He tests boundaries. He waits for the moment someone lets their guard down. Cole's expression hardened. Then he picked the wrong place. They walked back to the cabin as the sky darkened. Mara stayed close to Cole, not out of helplessness, but because she realized he understood how to read danger in ways she never could. She wasn't alone in the uncertainty anymore. Inside, Cole lit the lantern again, casting a calm glow across the wooden walls. Mara sat on the bed, hands clasped in her lap, while Cole secured the windows one by one. Get some rest, he said. I'll keep watch for a while. Mara looked up at him. You trust me enough to sleep while I'm awake. Cole paused, studying her features. You're here because you ran from a man who wants control. That tells me enough. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the weight of being believed without argument. Cole stood near the door, listening to the distant wind. Mara lay down, careful to face the wall so he wouldn't see the emotion tightening her chest. For the first time since fleeing her old life, she didn't fear the coming night, because someone else was listening for danger. Someone who had chosen to stand between her and whatever hunted her, and someone who would not yield easily. The storm of uncertainty continued, gathering in the distance. But inside the cabin, the foundations of something unspoken, something steady and rare, quietly began to take shape. The storm arrived at dawn, blowing in from the west with sheets of wind that rattled the cabin shutters and pushed dust against the windows. Cole stepped outside before the weather worsened, shrugging into his coat and pulling his hat low as he surveyed the sky. The air carried a heavy, restless weight, something that signaled change more than danger. Mara stood at the doorway, clutching the frame to steady herself against the gusts. She watched Cole walk toward the barn with that same controlled stride he always used, the one that made him look unshakable even when he carried worry. The horses shifted anxiously inside their stalls, hooves scraping the packed earth. Mara moved to help, lifting her skirt as she stepped through the mud. Cole was already calming the bay, gelding with slow strokes along its neck. "Storm's turning rough," he said without looking up. "Animals feel it before we do." Mara grabbed a bucket and checked the other stalls, her movements confident despite the tension twisting her stomach. When she reached the last stall, she spotted a gap in the rear wall, a narrow split in the wood she hadn't noticed before. She ran her fingers along the crack. It wasn't old. Something had pressed against it recently. Hard. "Cole," she called quietly, "look at this." He came over immediately, examining the break with careful attention. His jaw tightened. That wasn't there yesterday. Mara felt her pulse climb up her throat. "Do you think someone was trying to get inside?" Cole studied the stall, running his hand along the fence post outside the barn. "If they wanted the horses, they'd have taken one. This is something else." Mara stepped back, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "He's closer than we thought." Cole didn't confirm it, but the silence he held told her the truth anyway. They spent another hour checking the property again. Cole found a second disturbed area near the creek, where leaves and dirt had been brushed aside. Someone had knelt there recently, long enough to leave an imprint, but not long enough for the weather to cover it. Back in the cabin, Mara warmed her hands near the stove, unable to shake the feeling of being hunted. The room, once a pocket of safety, now felt too exposed. Cole stood near the window, staring out at the gray horizon with an expression she hadn't seen before, focused, calculating, protective in a way that made her chest tighten. "We have to decide something," Cole said quietly. "If he's circling the homestead, hiding won't work much longer." Mara looked up, unsure of what he meant. "What choice do we have?" Cole stepped away from the window and sat across from her. "You can run again," he said. "Take my spare mare and ride east. You'll have a day's head start before he realizes you're gone." Her stomach dropped. The thought of riding alone through the plains made her mouth dry. She had survived running once, but she knew the cost. It stripped away whatever strength she had left and left her exposed with no guarantee of escape. "And if I stay?" she asked. Cole didn't hesitate. "Then I stand with you when he shows his face. He won't get past me easily." Mara stared at the table, feeling the weight of both choices pressing against her ribs. She thought about the nights she had slept under trees, shaking from cold, the days she rationed scraps to stay alive, the constant fear that footsteps behind her meant the end of her freedom. She thought about Cole's steadiness, the way he handed her responsibilities without hesitation, the way he listened without prying, the way he believed her without demanding proof. "I'm tired of running," Mara whispered. "I can't go back to a life where every sunrise means I have to leave before someone sees me. I want a place where I can stop moving." Cole's eyes softened, but he didn't smile. He studied her, as if making sure she wasn't deciding out of panic. "If you stay," he said firmly, "you stay knowing this man might force his way here. I won't let him take you, but the land doesn't offer guarantees." Mara lifted her chin, her decision solidifying like a slow-burning coal. "I stay, not because I want to drag you into danger, but because I refuse to go back to the woman I was when I arrived here. I'm stronger now, and I trust you." Cole exhaled slowly, something easing in his posture. "All right." She expected him to offer reassurance or promises, but Cole didn't speak in comfort. He spoke in preparation. "We'll make changes," he said. "I'll reinforce the shutters. You'll keep your knife nearby. If I tell you to move, you don't hesitate." Mara nodded, absorbing each instruction, letting responsibility replace fear. The storm thickened as afternoon passed, rain tapping against the windows in uneven rhythms. Cole worked on the doorframe, adding a second bolt while Mara organized supplies. Water jugs near the bed, blankets folded at the foot, spare clothing packed in a corner in case they needed to move fast. While she worked, she felt the cabin shift from a place of refuge to a place ready for defense. Not a fortress, not a battleground, just a home refusing to be taken easily. When evening settled, Cole sat near the stove, removing mud from his boots. Mara sat across from him, the firelight catching the strands of her hair as she combed them out with her fingers. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was layered with readiness, gratitude, fear, and something deeper neither had named. After a long moment, Mara spoke quietly. I don't know what my life is meant to look like from here. Cole lifted his gaze to her. Maybe you don't need the whole picture. Maybe you just need the next step. You've already taken it. Mara felt the words settle inside her, not as comfort, but as truth. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady. Cole stood, checking the rifle again. Tonight, we stay alert. Mara met his eyes. Together, he nodded once, accepting her choice fully. Outside, the storm thickened, hiding the plains and whoever walked them. Inside, the decision had been made. Neither of them would face what was coming alone. The storm broke in the early hours before sunrise, leaving a damp silence across the plains. The air held a clean chill, and the clouds drifted apart slowly, letting thin light spill across the ridge. Cole had not slept. He kept watch near the window with his rifle across his lap, listening for anything out of place. The lantern burned low beside him, its glow shifting across the wooden floor in steady flickers. Mara lay awake on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't drifted off either, but her exhaustion felt different now. Less like fear dragging her down and more like anticipation tightening in her chest. She knew the last day of her old life was coming. She could feel it in the stillness outside, in the way Cole kept checking the horizon, in the way her heartbeat steadied instead of panicking. When the sky finally brightened, Cole rose and strapped on his coat. I'm taking one more look around, he said. Stay inside until I call. Mara stood immediately. I'm coming with you. Cole studied her, evaluating her posture, her eyes, her breath. She wasn't frozen in fear. She wasn't trembling. She looked ready to face whatever waited beyond the door. After a long moment, he nodded. Stay close. They stepped outside together, boots sinking into the damp earth. The storm had left shallow puddles in the yard, and the fence posts glistened under the new morning light. A faint breeze carried the smell of wet soil and pine from the hills. It was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if the land itself was waiting. Cole walked ahead a few paces, scanning the ridge. Mara followed carefully, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. When they reached the rise behind the cabin, Cole stopped abruptly. Tracks fresh, deep boot marks in the mud, leading straight toward their homestead. Mara's breath caught. Cole crouched and touched the prints with the back of his fingers. The edges were sharp. These had been made only hours ago, maybe less. He was here during the storm, Cole murmured. Mara looked around quickly, searching for movement, but the world around them remained still. Then she noticed something ahead, a dark shape near the line of shrubs. She stepped closer until the form sharpened into a body slumped in the mud. She froze. Cole! He was already moving, approaching with his rifle raised in case the man wasn't alone. But as they drew nearer, it became clear the figure wasn't a threat. Mara's husband lay face down, soaked through, mud caked along his clothes, his fingers half clenched in the dirt. His horse was nowhere to be seen. The storm had been brutal. Lightning must have spooked the animal or thrown him. The man lay motionless, breath faint but not gone. Cole checked his pulse. He's alive, he said. Barely. Mara stood perfectly still. She had imagined this moment for months, him arriving with rage, shouting her name, dragging her back to a life she'd nearly died escaping. She had never imagined him broken on the ground, defeated by the land he thought he could conquer. What do you want to do? Cole asked quietly. Mara took a slow breath. Her heart wasn't racing. Her hands didn't shake. She felt no urge to flee. Instead, she felt something close to clarity. Help him stand, she said. Then I'll speak to him. Cole lifted the man by his coat and hauled him upright. Mara's husband groaned weakly, eyes half open, disoriented. He blinked at Mara, confused, as if unable to understand how she was standing here unharmed and unafraid. Mara, he rasped. She stepped closer, holding his gaze with a strength she had never shown him before. I'm not going with you, she said steadily. Not now. Not ever. He opened his mouth to argue, but Cole stepped between them with a controlled firmness. You heard her. This is her choice. The man's eyes shifted to Cole, and something in his expression collapsed. Not anger, but the realization that he had lost something he'd never valued properly. The defeat hit him harder than the storm had. Mara didn't look away. You can go back east. You can start over. But if you ever come for me again, you won't get the chance to walk away. Her husband swayed unsteadily, then nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Cole released him, letting the man catch himself before he toppled. With his strength depleted, he staggered away from the homestead, disappearing slowly across the valley, a figure shrinking against the open plains until he vanished for good. When he was finally gone, Mara felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from a release of something she had carried far too long. Cole stepped beside her, offering steady support without touching her, waiting for her to find her balance on her own. "You did that," he said. "Not me." Mara closed her eyes briefly, letting the truth of it settle inside her. "I thought I'd break when I saw him," she admitted. "But I didn't." "Because you're stronger than you think," Cole replied. She looked toward the cabin, the small porch, the windows, the smoke rising from the leftover coals inside. She thought about the work she'd done, the animals she'd tended, the quiet evenings where she felt her heartbeat slow instead of race. She realized she no longer saw the cabin as temporary shelter. She saw it as home. Cole watched her expression shift, reading her thoughts without forcing them aloud. "You don't have to decide anything right this moment," he said, "but the door stays open for you." Mara turned to him fully, seeing the man who had given her a bed without condition, who had stood watch through storms, who had taken her fears seriously when no one else ever had. Her decision came without hesitation. "I'm staying," she said, "not because I'm afraid to leave, but because I want a life here with you." Cole didn't smile often, but a quiet warmth settled in his eyes. He stepped closer, letting the moment breathe between them before speaking. "Then you stay," he said, "and we build whatever comes next together." They walked back to the cabin side by side, the morning light growing brighter with each step. The storm had washed the land clean, and the air felt lighter, as if the burden both of them carried had finally lifted. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered warmly. Mara hung her shawl on the peg beside Cole's coat, placing it there with intention, a gesture that marked the beginning of a life she had chosen freely. Cole stood beside her, his presence steady and certain. The danger was gone. Her old life was finished, and the quiet that filled the room now wasn't loneliness. It was belonging. The story closed not with fear or uncertainty, but with two people standing in the same home, ready to face every new sunrise together.